All right, from the studio in Fairfax City, we are very grateful that Mike McEvoy accepted the invitation to our show. Mike, welcome to my humble podcast, man.
Oh, it's a pleasure and really wonderful to meet you, and thank you for the invitation.
No problem, man. I was looking at your kind of CV background, and you have done so much stuff, man. A nominated composer, eclectic music background, scoring for TV, commercial, dramas, long form documentary. Of course, as a musician, you have worked with many of the world's leading popular music artists. So good for you. Let's go back to the beginning of your life. How do you start in music to begin with? Were you born like in a sort of musical family or so?
Well, yeah. So my father was not born in a musical family. It was actually quite a sort of, I suppose, you could say, humble or almost poor. A very tough background, Irish American. But he loved music, and he actually started playing the banjo ukulele. It's a ukulele. He learned all these 50s songs, and he used
Yeah.
to, um, uh, sing them on the beach when he was in the summers, like, Everly Brothers and a lot of doo-wop groups and stuff like that. And so he was very lucky that he benefited from the investments in that were taking place in investment in science in America. So he was able to get a thing called a Sarnoff Fellowship when he was working. He got that at RCA, and he decided to study at Imperial College in London. So I was 3 years old when we arrived here, and I was already into music. He could see that I had a kind of, I suppose, a motivation. And I started learning instruments at basically like sort of 4 or 5, and he used to
Yeah.
tell stories about how he used to play Mozart's operas, and I would learn the melodies. He said, I mean, these are stories he tells me. I can't remember this, but whistling along to Mozart. But yeah, so a funny thing is, he actually took me to see the Beatles in 1964.
Wow.
I was 3 years old. I don't remember it, but I'm sure it had an impression on me because by the age of 6 or 7, I was already at the piano learning their songs by ear. Because they were, those are iconic changes as well. So I was very motivated myself to be a musician. And I think a lot of that had to do with moving around. Like, he lived in Switzerland for a while. He studied, he was in there doing physics. He was in superconductivity, an area of physics that, that took us around different places. So music was like, right from the very beginning, it was almost like a companion, and it was something that was a way of processing feelings and stuff, and also a way of engaging and connecting with people, because I changed schools a lot as I grew up. So piano lessons from the age of 6 or 7, like classical lessons, although I was always basically learning by ear and copying records. My first record I ever bought, I'm not sure if you heard of this record, but it was by Edgar Winter, and it's called Frankenstein. It's an instrumental track. I bought it when I was 9. It was the first record I was obsessed with. If you ever find it, it's incredible. It's like, I
Is that album under Windham Hill? No, no.
don't think
I,
so. This was back. It was a 7-inch single. This is like
I need to check it out. No.
this is 1970. We're talking
Yeah.
about. It's a great riff. It's like an instrumental, like
Yeah.
unison
Wow.
riff. It's like it's jazz. It's like jazz rock almost. But
Yeah.
I was obsessed with this record at 9. So I think that kind of almost that is quite I think an omen for what my interests in music were. It was never pop, really. It was never, although the Beatles were very popular, but they had these, as we know, they had classical influences and the George Martins, amazing guidance and mentorship that, they had modulations in their songs. They were interesting musicians. That's why I love learning those songs. But yeah, so that was, pretty much from there, music was everything to me, from right from the beginning, and always having a band. I was in a band when I was 9 in America before we moved to England again. Actually, one of the guys who was in that band is still a very good friend of mine. He's playing with Bonnie Raitt at the moment. His name is Duke Levine, we just saw him in June in Brighton, and he was playing with Mary Chapin Carpenter. In fact, I know you really love Real World, and he always would come over and record in Real World with Mary Chapin.
Wow. Yeah, yeah.
Actually, he's someone you should get on your show. He's a great guy, an amazing guitarist. The other
Right.
band he was an MBE for ages was Peter Wolf, who was in Jay Giles' band. So they're really good friends. But Duke and me were in a band when we were 10. And we both had these careers in music, and we've stayed together for like, stayed in touch for, 40, 50 years now almost, so uh, yeah, that's basically how it started.
So eventually you finished high school, right? Um, and music was an important part of your life. Any pressure from your parents about, hey, forget about music, become an engineer, become a doctor, you can form a family and then do music on the side, or you were kind of free to choose your path and with cautions because the music, the lifestyle of musician is very tough. A lot of them don't make it and they work nights and sleep during the day and so kind of crazy lifestyle, but
Well, that's a really, great question, because I suppose in a way I was kind of fortunate that my father and both my parents, they were both teachers, they, educators. That's what they eventually became. I mean, and so what they saw that my obsession with music was not something I was going to, I wasn't going to do anything else. But so what they made sure of is that I had a really strong theoretical musical background. And my dad actually, I remember we were in London. We just moved back to London after, we spent 5 years on the East Coast in a place called Worcester, where he taught at Clark University. And we back. I was 13, and he came home in England, and he brought me a viola. I'd never played a stringed instrument. He said, "You have to learn this." And he said, "If you want to keep on playing that rock music, you have to learn a classical instrument." I could read music, but that was not really what I was about. Yeah, I've never been a great sight reader on piano, but I can write and I can score. But not. I was never a pianist in that way. Piano was always a kind of, which is my kind of main instrument, I suppose. Guitar and piano are almost sort of similar levels, but it was always for me like an accompaniment for songwriting or for playing in the band. So I was not a classical virtuoso, but on the viola, I got into it and I was very quick to pick it up, and there's always a need for violists. They're always in need. And so I was quickly able to audition and become part of this orchestra that was in London. Part of the school symphony. It was called the London School Symphony Orchestra, and a lot of great players who are now like top session musicians in the classical world and film world came out of this school called CYM, Center for Young Musicians. In fact, I used to go every Saturday to music school in Pimlico in London. And some of the people who were my contemporaries there is a guy named Steve Sigwell, who's a big musical arranger now. He's done like The Voice. He's done a lot of West End shows. We Will Rock You. He's the MD for that. He's done tons of stuff. Other people like Django Bates. I don't remember Django Bates, great jazz musician. He was there. He was a trumpet player in the orchestra. Who else? Steve Nickel, who was another trumpet player, was one of the main guys in Loose Ends, the band Loose Ends. So a lot of people who were, and this was for people who were kind of not low income, but you didn't pay for it. It was part of what is called the ILEA, Inner London Education Authority. So it was provided if you would audition, if you were good enough. It was for comprehensive education. So not, if you were privately educated, you wouldn't have access to this. It was only for comprehensive. So it was a wonderful thing. We went on tour to Scandinavia. I was 17, and our conductor was a young up-and-coming conductor named Simon Rattle. You ever Simon Rattle? He's like he did the Berlin Symphony Orchestra. He's like world-class conductor now. He was our conductor. He was 23 and we were all like 17, 18. So we had these amazing experiences, playing symphonies. But on this other side of me is I always had a band, and I was, writing music and, a lot of jazz funk. I was learning things like the music that I was really into during that period, which was, I talk mid 70s to late 70s. when I was doing my bands was like the Jazz Crusaders or Weather Report, Earth, Wind and Fire. I was into all this kind of, I suppose you could say it's jazz influence, rhythmic, syncopated music. And that was what I was learning by ear, by listening to the records, jamming along. Also like Average White Band, or who else was I into? I mean, all these bands was what they were all making records at that time. And that was what I was into, and learning my riffs. Prince, some of the early Prince, not the later stuff. Not, I like the early stuff of his. Yeah, Quincy Jones, massive, like studied him for production. Loved the horn arrangement, especially like Off the Wall, or which was that first Michael Jackson album that I think production wise was just amazing. With people like the Louis Brothers Johnson on the rhythm section, and Harvey Mason, all these dudes. Steely Dan, of course, which we've already touched on. Obsessed with their later stuff, particularly Asia and Gaucho. Those two albums for me were like, oh, and Royal Scam was also amazing. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my foundational musical experience. So very extreme, very diverse in many ways.
Yeah, you have done. I was checking, man, your bio. We need to thank Alice and Maggie from Airedale for putting this biography together that are very, very comprehend, like 6 pages, man. So I'm always unloaded when I'm preparing questions for the interviews because they're very, very well done. All right, so what do we want to do? Let's concentrate on kind of music today, and then for part 2 and part 3, we can do the film section of your life, if you will. In 1998, you met the Curiously Killed the cat, and joined the band for the second record. Of course, you were a co-writer and the keyboard player. So what memory do you have from that period, man?
Oh, The Curiosity Killed the Cat?
Yeah.
Well, wow. I mean, that album took 3 years to make. That's one thing. So it was an incredible. Actually, I have to credit my wife. She walked up to the lead singer Ben at a club and said, "Hey, you should work with my husband." And we got together for a jam. And I think he knew of me because of a few other things I'd done before that. Like I'd done a record with Ian Dury. I don't know if you remember Ian Dury, Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. So I did a solo album with him when I was 21, where I co-wrote half the album and was the MD. So then a couple of years later, basically that's when I met Ben and the guys, and we just got along. I was about 2 years older than most of the guys in the band. All the other guys were a couple of years younger than me, and but their influences were great. So that album was quite incredible. We had 3 different producers, which, over a period of time, but one of the producers who I think for me was just a legend, and someone who I just think is amazing that he even agreed to produce us. He did 2 tracks. Alan Toussaint came over to England, and we went to Chipping Norton to record with him. And man, those tracks were great because he was like, "Let us do it live." But the first producer, who is a great guy, and he's had made some amazing music. Leon Silvers the third. I don't know if you know, he did all like the Solar Records stuff. But what happened in that situation? We were in Los Angeles for like 6 weeks, and they were trying to they wanted to do everything programmed. And the drummer, was a drummer. He wasn't like an amazing drummer, but he had a great vibe. And they had done the album before that, their first album, which was a hit, all live. And the producer, I think it was Stuart Levine, who, as you know, is probably, great engineer, great guy. He had done a fantastic job on the album. There was 3 big hit records off that, and that they were like number 1, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a shame. I think that, the Alan Toussaint tracks were great. And then the final producer was Nathan East, who came in, and as we know, he's an amazing bass player. He's played with everybody, and he's a really great guy. I mean, I already got along with him very well. And the band, I think at that point, were a little bit, I don't know, we were all a bit tired because it was like, let's get this album done. We were at the Manor Studios, which was owned by Virgin Records, up in Oxfordshire, like in a residential for ages, and getting the album done. And in fact, one of the tracks, Nathan was not happy with the drum track, and I think I mentioned this before, that he actually flew out his old buddy Jeff Porcaro to come and play to redo the drums. And it was kind of weird because I felt like I was a little bit in between the band and Nathan. Nathan could see that, I was not a member of the band, but I was obviously a kind of bridge between them and the production. And we had to get this album done. But it was kind of quite a chaotic experience, but it was very interesting for me because it was the opportunity for me to really see how the corporate music industry deals with pop artists. And that was something I took away from it, was very, very useful for future because, like the A&R people, often they have this concept, and if they're dealing with very young people who are maybe not so sure themselves, or they don't know how to assert or, be clear about what they want to do or what they don't want to do, then bands can just be kind of just turned into one down like dead end streets, where they're actually, what comes out of it is not really what they want. So the album came out pretty well, but it only sold 500,000 copies, which by these standards would be great, right? If you sold 500,000 records right now, you'd be like golden.
That's
But
right.
1980, 88 or 89, when the record came out, the record company needed them to sell like 2 million or more. And the accountants just said, we haven't sold enough records. And after 6 months, just dropped the band. So that was another, education in how the industry works. And during that time, the industry was in this really kind of crazy period of like consolidation, where record labels, in fact, I think they were originally with either Polydor or Polygram, and that got bought up, and then it got another bought up, and it was this consolidation. As we know now, we have basically are there only three major labels? I think Universal, Sony, and Warner Bros. And in fact, Warner Bros. Aren't that big. I think they've been bought up. I've lost track, It's like, but this is the thing about the difference between being a music maker and a music business person and the industry itself. I have some very strong opinions about that we don't have to go into right now. But, you think of executives who essentially have that, in record labels, who have sort of quite secure positions. They're getting a monthly wage. They have an expense account. And there's the bands who are trying to be creative, and they're young, usually very naive about the business aspect of things. Unless they have a really loyal, dedicated, strong manager who is on their side and going to fight for them, things can really go awry. And I think that's what happened with the band. Unfortunately, they were very talented, but they just weren't managed properly.
Yeah, I have seen that many, many times all over the world. And I'm glad you mentioned Nathan, because I interviewed him recently, and he's one of the nicest guys in the world as well. He's a very humble guy as well. And yeah, back in the day, when you are, like you mentioned, you are young, you're 20, you sign anything they put in front of you to make a little bit of money, and they destroy your career. Unfortunately, a lot of people in the music, they are not business savvy, right? They're record label, manager, promoter will take advantage. They will take 99% of the money out of you if they can. The music industry it's like a mafia, it's unfortunate, it's
I mean, it's a great way. I mean, if you think of like the kind of deals that were done, particularly in those days. I mean, now there's a lot more flexibility, people doing independent stuff or digital. Deals would be like 10 or 12%. And after that's on net. So they'd recoup everything first, all the costs before they would get any money. So most of these, that's why you have these big court cases where Prince tried to buy back his masters, or George Michael. Both of them, sad they're both gone now, which I think is another kind of complete tragedy. These are talented people, but they weren't even allowed to buy back their masters after they had paid back everything and made tons of profit for their label. They weren't able to own their own master tapes. So, this is it, the business, it's business, and like you said, young people, they come in, they just want to make their music, they want to go out and play, they're very trusting, they're naive, they think, hey, it's all fine, and it's
Yeah,
changing a little bit now. It's a little bit different now, I think, because there's much more, I suppose, opportunities to release music and do it DIY, which I think is great.
that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And well, one day we'll talk about the Spotify, which is another ripoff. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. So Eddie, in 1999, you scored the feature film Vroom, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Vroom. Oh, yeah.
Vroom, yeah. And what memory do you have of that? That was the year after that.
Well, Vroom, I mean, that kind of fell into my lap, and I'll tell you what was going on. The guy, I co-scored that with a guy named Adam Kidron,
Yeah,
who was a producer I'd done a lot of work for. He actually really got me into like session work right from early on. And I was at the time going out with his sister. So there was a kind of family connection, you could say there.
yeah,
And the third person in that was B-Band Kidron, who was the director. So B-Band needed a score for her film, and she knew I was a good musician, and her brother was a good engineer and producer. So we ended up scoring the film. And B-Band Kidron now, I'm not sure if you probably don't know much about like the British political establishment, but B-Band Kidron went on to do lots of other films. But she's also now Baroness Kidron. She's in the House of Lords here, and she's a very fantastic activist about and really pushing for protections for children on phones and internet, particularly phones. So
yeah,
B.J. Who was a director, went on to have a fantastic career as a filmmaker and did lots of great stuff, but has also now transitioned to be a very strong advocate for protections against the tech to protect children from a lot of content that is dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. If you
yeah.
ever look her up, she's on LinkedIn. There's some fantastic speeches she gives in the House of Lords and trying to fight the tech companies and also fighting for musicians' rights about like in terms of AI and kind of their ability to scrape and use their art content for training models. So she's a great, really cool person.
An interview there because he has a lot of. I work in that area, right? It's a computer consultant and in data science, and it's the world is. Believe me, the world is changing. Have been changing under the carpet, as they say here, and people don't know what is coming. It's kind of sad, but hey, those big companies, big tech companies, they're very powerful. They can buy any politician. They can change the law. There'll be so much money involved, and
Yep.
unfortunately, when you have so much money, your moral values change, and you become a different person when you run a company. Anyway, that's a conversation for maybe for another day, but it would be great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's I'm fascinated by that. The
Yes,
fact,
absolutely.
and also, in terms of how which we'll talk about later, but this is a very important part of my life now in terms of to be as aware as possible of things that are going on. I mean, it's an amazing book. You might know this woman, Susanna Zuboff. Do you know her?
No,
She's a Harvard person. I'm trying to think of the book where I thought it was up there, but she writes about how how Facebook evolved and kind of like the like button was how that was kind of
mm,
representing a way to endure kind of like dopamine hits and the kind of structure of these particularly the social media.
yeah,
But when I'm working with, I teach 1 day a week at a music college. It's freelance, so it's where I can essentially, if I need to, I get a debt. But I teach third year songwriting for the third year university, and in the afternoon media, scoring for media. But a lot of what I talk about and what I'm is to kind of say what's going on underneath the hood, what's going on in the industry,
yeah,
and I tell them the importance of the metadata if they're going to release music, their information properly registered and stuff like that. So, and also to beware, of not allowing themselves to get too sucked into the idea that social media is the only way to kind of let people know about your music.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll go there another time.
Yeah. And people, the majority of folks live like zombies. Let me give an example, right? So, because a lot of people, follow the channel and the interview, I can publish the stupid article in the history of the universe with wrong facts and everything, and people will check like it, without even read the stuff, without even, in my hypothetical example, read about the stupid stuff that I have said, and as if they want to be part of, because I'm doing the interview, without thinking that, hey, you even read the article. I put a lot of wrong stuff there on purpose. And people will say, check, as if they want to be part of me or the interview. That's a simple example. And it's, and that's crazy, man, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, in terms of like the ability for people to, I suppose, in time, even taking the time to really go deep and peel away the layers of something and really kind of do your proper research about stuff. I mean, yeah, it's such a kind of stimulation these days as well, like this, just to kind of get in this habit of switching off and just having time. I mean, for me, like nature connectedness is a very, very important thing. In fact, I know I'm going off on another tangent here, but just briefly, I'm on the last year of a part-time PhD, which is it's a practice-based one, and it's about how music performance can be used in conjunction with visuals of nature, rhythms that exist in nature. Because as you probably know as a scientist, music is all around us. How we, the harmonic series, for instance, that exists there it's in nature. We just uncovered it as humans, and the resonance of objects. If I take this, as a tone like na na, right? Na 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 na. That's a minor third. Na na na. There's music all around us, and this how we have got the scale, how the scale came about. Do do no 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 no. That diatonic scale is basically frequencies. You cut it in half, it's an octave above. You cut it in fifths, it's a third, it's a fifth above. So all these things are just waveforms, right? That's basic physics, and it's all there. We're just kind of learning about it. It's just being taught. Nature is teaching us. And so a lot of my research is also about looking at where did music come from and in terms of how we've organized it. But essentially, if we go back to pre-language, what are the common things that we all have as human beings? We have emotional sound. If I went, ah, that I'm sad or scared or whatever. If I go, that I'm happy. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. Doesn't matter what culture you come from. Those things are common to all humanity. And we just, when we make music, we put those basic things in their nuanced way out in sound. So there's no, I mean, okay, the songs, when you have songs with lyrics, that's very definitive. But if you're just hearing music, you can feel the joy or you can feel the sadness, you can feel the pain, whatever it is, it doesn't matter what culture you are. And obviously different musics have evolved in different parts of the world, and they may have to do with environment. It may have to do with the materials that exist in those areas, the kinds of wood, that's there or whatever. So, that's kind of, I'm trying to create some processes where musicians can get together. Doesn't matter what their tradition is, whether that's, classical, rock, jazz, and very simply make sound in response to nature. That's a long answer to my PhD.
Yeah. No, you're right. Music has always been there in the background. We human beings figured it out how to make it into meaningful thing for us, right? And music, but the music has always been there. Man, you have done so much stuff here. Of course, in 1990, you were involved with Soul to Soul, and of course with the diva, soul diva, Tina Marie,
Mhm.
sings One Day on Ivory. Feel free to elaborate. What memory do you have of that period as well?
Yeah, I mean, when Soul to Soul came out, I was like, wow, okay, this is a UK based band because I suppose that, like there wasn't many artists in the UK who were doing that kind of thing. And I always loved, like I said, Quincy Jones was a big part of my like that production he did and that sound, or Morris White, the Earth, Wind and Fire sound, uh, you know, Weather Report, Steely Dan. So it was like music that had kind of like a great groove and stuff like that. That was always what I loved. And when Soul to Soul came out, I was like, yes, I love this. And I was able to, I can't remember how I tracked Jazzy down, but I think they were in British. What's the studio called? It was up in Hybrid Islington, not British Grove. I mean, I'm getting mixed up. Britannia Row, maybe it was called. It was. I don't think it's there anymore. But anyway, I went and said to him, I said, "Listen, man, I need to work with you." I think it's basically what I wanted. I was very, very pushy. And and I think he heard some things I'd done. I can't remember. Um, and I ended up playing a lot of keyboards on their second album, and I actually had a co-write on the album, which actually got me a publishing deal with Sony. That was another experience with the corporate as a songwriter. But Jazzy is someone. I mean, I still see him every so often. He has been a really important mentor in my life. One of a handful of people who have really been influential. And he's just a really incredible, powerful force, man, in the industry, and very not afraid to confront the bullshit, And I've really benefited for him embracing me, this white guy, middle class kind of musician, and going in there. I mean, I used to go in there like he used to call me sometimes, like to come in to do a session. He'd call me like 10 o'clock at night. He say, "Hey, Mikey, how you doing? Come on down." So I go down there, right? And it's like just all like West Indian guys there. And there's a guy that used to be this great guy named Naphtali. I don't think he's with us anymore. Naphtali he was the chef. So he had a whole, by this point he had like a big building. He was like, he had bought his own building, he owned his own rights. He just made, he had a shop. He had a shop in Camden Town where he used to sell the merchandising and all the kind of slogans. He had the whole concept. He was like branded everything. The whole 360, he was across it. And Naphtali would be sort of creating some kind of like stew out of whatever sort of ackee rice and rice and peas and kind of like curry goat or whatever it was. And I remember actually, funny enough, it was time when I once had a bit of a sore throat. He said, "Hey man, try some of this." And he went under and he pulled out this bottle which had like all these roots and stuff in it, and said, "Just try some of this to knock the cold out." So he gave me that, and I was like, "Whew," burned me down, like. So he was into natural kind of like remedies and stuff. But we had such a great time. I mean, it was a fantastic period. Working in the studio. So it was about, I suppose, that was almost a 10-year period where we really did a lot of stuff up until 9/11, actually. And then 9/11, after that happened, a lot of his funding got pulled for his label, and some of the stuff that we were working on got shelved. But there was a track that came out on an artist named Wookie, who was a kind of UK garage house kind of guy, and I played a guitar on one of those tracks. It was like a Spanish like solo, really, Spanish guitar solo, that was over like a kind of a house beat. But it was cool, man. It was, I mean, so it was very interesting experience for me, kind of like, because they were very much from a DJ base. They were coming from a sound system and DJs, and about how does music affect people on the dance floor? How do we get people dancing? But it wasn't electronic. It wasn't like, it was sort of something about it had that kind of more of an influence of like the African syncopated rhythms. If you think of like, I don't know if you know the big, like some of the tracks like Back to Life, which is like still played now. It's like boom, boom, it's like, it's very kind of like you immediately want to start moving. It's like those kind of grooves. So I really I really just, enjoyed and loved what they were doing. And Jazzy has done lots of things. We've done lots of things over the years together in really strange things. Like, I mean, you remember Jamie, Jamie Oliver?
Yeah.
He once had a TV show called The Dream School. I remember he had a thing, a Dream School, where he would get people who were really experienced in their fields to come in and teach kids who were really rowdy had been excluded from school. And he got Jazzy B to come in to be the music teacher. It was a television show on Channel 4 here. And Jazzy brought me to be his teaching assistant. Those are the kind of things that Jazz done. So he's got a statue for himself now in Haringey, I think, which is where he was from, or maybe he came to town. But, he's he's become an iconic, important part of British culture where he's really changed things. He's really, been an influence for good, I think, to kind of bring people together and to sort of show the sort of the importance and the beauty of the multicultural aspect that is Britain. Britain is a multicultural place. Even though there's sort of obviously people who don't want to go that way, but I think you can't stop the tide of change. This is the way the world's going. We're all one family, man. It's like we're all just people.
That's right. Tell me about it. You know what's going on here in the US, so it's
Crazy.
crazy. Steve Winwood. How you end up doing your period with him? The guy is unbelievable. His music has resonated with me big time. There are bands that are really special for me. Like the Pink Floyd, for example, right? The Led Zeppelin of this world. Of course, the Genesis of the world with Peter Gabriel, Steve Winwood, and those are kind of my top. I have top 5, top 6 band that I have. Of course, they're way out there, and then everything else in between, of course. And of course, and then I discovered film music and the Marigone and the Italian filmmaker, and of course the John Williams of the world, and so on and so forth. But Steve Winwood is something special about that guy. And feel free to talk about how you met them and you end up joining about Traffic and all the good stuff.
I mean, Steve, you think of like don't.
That's your the keyword.
He was 16. He was 16 when he wrote that. Give Me Some Lovin'. He wrote that when he was 16. He jammed with Hendrix, Voodoo Child, listen, for me, how that came about it's a longish story if you want to know how it came about.
Well, I'm here to listen.
I'll try to be as succinct as I can. Okay. Yeah. I left school and didn't go to university. I left school and I went to music school for 1 term, and it wasn't right for me. They weren't teaching me what I wanted to teach, and I wanted to go in the studio. So I got a job in a recording studio, making tea and cleaning the toilets.
Yeah.
And getting sandwiches for the people, and just so I could see what's going on. And the idea was that after that, you become what is called a tape op. That was the apprentice way in 1979.
I know all about it.
And there was a studio called Matrix Studios in Little Russell Street in town, right behind the British Museum. And the owner was a guy named Nigel Frieda. He's still a good friend of mine. And he ended up owning tons of studios. He now owns an island called OC Island. Anyway, he's an amazing guy, and he was a dedicated loves music. So he had a very good friend who was hanging out there in the studio all the time. His name was Rebecca Coley. Have you ever come across that name?
No idea.
Rebop was in Traffic. He was the African drummer in Traffic. So you'll see him on the cover of In the Canteen. He's sitting there at the table with Traffic, and he was a big part of Traffic. All the way after the initial kind of more psychedelic stage, he joined them. But you see lots of videos of him online. Anyway, Rebop, what I used to do was when I had a break, and there was two studios there. It was actually three: Studio 1, 2, and then a mix room. I used to go into one of the free studios and I'd play piano and just jam around and hope that someone would like hear me, right? Call me in to hire me to do a session.
That's right.
And one day, Rebop came in and said, "Hey, he stood by the piano listening to me play." And this is obviously after Traffic had broken up. It was like we're talking about 70, 78, 79 when must have been 79, yeah.
Mm.
And Traffic broke up in 74, right? So, but he was hanging out there and he used to do lots of sessions. Rebop play with everybody. The Hyde Park concert where the Rolling Stones are playing?
Oh, yeah.
He's the drummer in the center.
Oh, I need to check it out. Okay, I need to look
conga
into it.
drummer. He was like that. He's a powerful force, man. Fantastic energy. Anyway, he took me under his wing and took me into the studio, and I used to play on his jams. And his very, very good friend was a guy named Roscoe G. Roscoe G was the bass player who was in the last formation of the original Traffic. He was on when the Eagle Flies. I don't know if you see, he's the guy who used to wear a top hat.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Top hat, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the beginning of the story. And I met those two guys way before I met Steve. In fact, one time Rebop was called to do a session for Steve up at the studio. And it was when he was making, I think, one of his solo albums. And I was in the car. I drove up there, with Rebop. And I remember going to his house. I didn't know really much about what was going on, but I was just there. So then jump ahead to where now we're talking about 1994, Christmas 1994. I mean, I've known Roscoe. I stayed in touch with Roscoe for many, many years. Sadly, Rebop died not long after in 88. No, sorry, 1981 he died. Very young, had a brain hemorrhage. But that was really tragic because he was like 3 years. He was like a mentor for me. We were in a band together. The band split up, and it was a bit of a messy time at the end. But Roscoe stayed a friend of me, and so when Steve was putting together Traffic, Roscoe suggested me because he knew that I could play guitar and keyboards, and I knew how to play Hammond. I was like, I'd been around before the drum machine took off. Just about a year before the drum machine started coming into the studio, I was still playing like all those old-fashioned keyboards, right? So, and then, basically Steve said, okay, let's meet him. So I met Steve for dinner. We had a dinner, we just talked, and we had a good vibe. He liked me. And next thing I know, I got the call to come up and join the band for the reunion tour. So this was Traffic Reunion Tour in 94. And I remember really clearly because I was really I didn't know the Traffic stuff. I knew Steve Winwood. I knew Back in the High Life. I knew Roll With It,
Yeah. Oh, man.
That's what I knew. I didn't know the Traffic, so I had to learn all this stuff, this other stuff that was earlier. Because I was more into I suppose during that period when Traffic were doing their music. I was more into rock and kind of, stuff like that, But anyway, so I learned all the stuff really carefully. And then I went to the rehearsal up at Steve's house. And I don't think Steve would mind if I say this, but I kind of knew the stuff better than they did. A couple of times Steve had to say, what's that chord, Mike? I mean, because they were all having to relearn this stuff as well, the old stuff that they had written 30 years ago. But I really got my homework because I was super scared.
Of course.
I had all my charts and everything written out, all the chords exactly as they were. But so I think Steve saw in me that I was very thorough. I was a really thorough, I was going to, really learn stuff and be careful and be conscientious and, blah, blah, blah. So I think Steve recognized that in me, so that after we did the tour, that was great. Steve was really a lovely guy. And also Jim was a really cool guy. We had an amazing drummer as well, Rafredo Riaz, on that tour, who you loved. I mean, he's now playing with Chicago, but he was in Stantana. He'd be a fun guy for you to interview.
All right, that's okay.
He's great, and he comes from a family of Cuban musicians as well. I mean, he knows everybody in that whole world. But anyway, so we had a great tour, 88 dates, 6 months, all around America. We played with the Grateful Dead. We did these stadium gigs, like we had 10 stadium gigs with the Grateful Dead, which were like mind blowing. You know,
Yes.
so like that was like in terms of my live being a live performer, I've never been much of a live performer in that way. So I went from like basically, I'll tell you what, actually, this is something that might find quite interesting. Right before I got that call, which would have been January, 94, the prior sort of period of time, I had been like no work, nothing was going on. There was, and we had just had our child, my wife and I, who I'm still with, and she was only like she was only 6 months or so, and I was not getting enough work. The only work I was doing was teaching 1 day a week in a prison, a C category prison called the Mount. That
I
was
got
that was the only job I was having, and I was, we were getting into debt, and so my dad at the time had sort of given up teaching, but he had a travel business, and he was thinking of maybe handing it over to me if I wanted it, because now that I have a family and I'm starting to do this thing, I had some success. I had the Curious to Kill the Cat album, I had that, but nothing had really turned into something substantial yet.
good, good.
So over that whole Christmas period, I was praying, saying, "Okay, God, what should I do? What's the right thing to do here?" And I came to terms with the fact that I would give up music professionally and take on my dad's business, and that music would be something I could enjoy and do as a hobby. And that was okay because I love my wife. I want to do the right thing. And that was always been, that was my kind of mantra. What's the right thing to do here? So I said to dad, okay, dad, this is great. I appreciate it. And listen, let's talk, as New Year begins, we'll get into it. And I got a call like the first week of January. And I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing to me? And it was really weird. And it was one of those moments where you kind of think to yourself, I don't know, it's like whether it's me joining coincidences or just whatever, but it was a moment of like real kind of like, okay, and my dad, of course, he said, go for it. In fact, my dad liked Steve Winwood. He thought he's a great guy. And in fact, when rehearsal started, my dad drove me up to the first day of rehearsals because, I mean, I'm going into a studio. I was 30, 33. These guys were all like late 50s. And, my dad, so he took me up there and Steve was like, hello, Mr. McEvoy. He was very like that to my dad, very respectful. My dad like really saw something in Steve and he felt very like at home. In fact, my dad tells this great story that he spoke to Roscoe about it, on this day, the day we were there. He said, "Hey, Roscoe, it's fantastic you've recommended Michael for this gig and just, this man, that's so nice of you." And Roscoe said, "Well, this is my dad says this. He conveys the story to me." He said, "Well, Roscoe said to him, well, we thought we better get him before the Beatles do."
All right.
Well, that's apparently what Roscoe. I mean, Roscoe's obviously joking. I mean, the Beatles were never to get
Wow.
together, but I mean, it was a major break for me. I mean, I'd had different breaks in my life. It's can be troughs and whatever. That's the music industry. As you said, I've been a freelancer all my life. I've never had a solid regular job. Even my teaching, I've only ever done one. For a while, I did 2 days a week, but I'd never, and I've always been like, I've never had a contract, to teach. It's been like a day on freelance basis, like I just send my
Yeah.
invoice. And I like that autonomy. I like that freedom, but obviously it's taken me a long time to get to a place now where there's enough of a catalog that gives a little bit of money coming in through my royalties that from many different sources, but it's like, yeah, and then I don't have to do so much. I can make a few choices about what I want to do. Right there, I'd have to always hustle for a next job. But that thing with Steve, with Traffic, what happened after that was that went really well. And me and Steve had in fact, he was very inspiring. He gave me a great gift while we were there because he's a very spiritual guy.
Yeah.
And he gave me a book. He turned me on to Mere Christianity. Do you know the book?
Yeah, I know the book. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So he gave me that book, and he's a special man. And then he asked me after that when he was doing his solo album, he asked if I'd come and do some programming on the album. Michael Narada Walden was the producer. So I did half the album, programmed half the album, played a bit of keyboards on it, working with Michael in the studio at Steve's studio. And then he asked me to MD his next tour, which was the Junction 7 tour. So I was able to, and he wanted to use Wolfredo on drums, which I was like, of course, why not? But I was able to put forward people that I knew from London, British museums, and we had a fantastic band. And the Junction 7 tour, we had a fantastic time doing that. We did another tour of the States and Europe festivals, and then yeah, I mean, I could have continued doing stuff with Steve, but what happened was there was a couple of things with my family. My wife got a little bit, she had an illness which she needed me to be there, so I had to sort of duck out or something. And then I think I decided after that that really I didn't want to continue playing other people's music. I mean, as much as Steve's great and he's still a lovely guy, I've always been a writer. I've always been a composer. And that's kind of where, so in '99, I kind of stepped back from it. But, Steve's been good to me. He's still, I saw him last October. In fact, I'm going to be recording at his studio again this October with a band I'm producing, a young
Yeah.
band I'm mentoring. So, and he's just a lovely man,
Yeah, he's a very good guy, and all right. On that note, let's say we finish part one now.
Okay.
I need to go to work, and then I will send you an email. We can coordinate for part two. I have time, of course, if according to your schedule as well, and then we'll continue with the story. We have a lot more to talk about, man.
Well, I'm sorry. I hope I'm not being too long-winded about stuff.
No. Hey, if one day you end up writing an autobiography, you can listen to the interview and then we will cover everything in your life. And
Yeah.
to go the film area, the short film, the television, and you were a session musician with the top best of the best, man. So I will have many questions going forward. So
It's great talking to you, man.
same here. You're a very good guy, man. Like very nice talking to you.
Well, I look forward to the next one, and you have a good day at work.
You bet. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Lovely.